So, good evening to everybody. Good night for who is in Asia, like we are. So, welcome to everybody. This is our fourth roundtable. This evening we will have a huge group with a new entry that is Damn History, and we will have Ian New World Econ, Web Union, Eric and Tanks, Defense Politics Asia, Damn History, and we are waiting also for War in Ukraine and Alex History Legends. So, as usual, I will let all the guests talk. I will try to stay as more silent as I can tonight. I will collect all your questions that you want to give to all the guests in the chat. If you can, and if you want to send it to any guest, please put the name of the guest before the question, so I will know. If it's for everybody, just don't put any type of name. So today it's like a day full of news, full of updates. We have this offensive, because if I will call it counter-offensive, Alex will be pissed off. So I will call it offensive, Ukrainian offensive. The Kerch Bridge, Crimean Bridge, and today the missile attack in Ukraine. So, Ian, if you want to start, so we can take like the clockwise order.
All right. Well, you just want a quick introduction, correct? My name is Ian. I run the YouTube channel Nude World Economics. Mainly started the channel as kind of a geopolitical talk sesh, so I didn't bother the people around me. I could bother people on the internet instead, and it's really been consumed by the events going on in Ukraine since. So I've been reporting on frontline updates and aspects of the Ukraine war since I think early April now.
Okay, it's my turn. I am Weep Union, and my main channel is Weep Union War Updates, where I post daily updates on the war in Ukraine, what happens, and my own personal analysis on what will happen, the significance of what happens, and so on. And I also have two separate other channels that I haven't really posted on yet, but they'll be in the future. So if you like what I do, check me out, and we go down.
DPA.
Hello everyone. This is Defense Politics Asia, and I'm Wyatt, and I know what you're thinking. Nice quote. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm from Singapore. I run the channel Defense Politics Asia, and it's actually also a news media outlet, which currently only me running. So if you can go to defensepoliticsasia.com. There's a lot of very old articles because I haven't write new ones because I have no time. So anyway, yeah, you can find me at Defense Politics Asia, or you can just type DPA. Tends to come out on YouTube.
Eric.
Hello, I'm Eric from the Instagram account Eric and Tanks. I run a news account with also history and military history content. And if you want to ask me some questions about my return from Ukraine, you can in the comment. I will answer.
Thanks, Eric. And this evening we will have a new guest that is Damn History that answered to my request. Later we will have also War in Ukraine and History Legends. But now, like his presentation, then we will start.
Shall I take the stage, gentlemen?
Yes.
All right, guys. So I am both live, both for you on YouTube and also for my audience right now on TikTok. So I'm looking at two screens and trying to make them roll over to the YouTube link. So little by little, they should be coming in. But basically, my name is Sebastian. I run mostly on TikTok and I do quick news. I'm actually a historian. My qualification is I have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in history that I've gone from the University of Miami, And then the other one is between international business and economics in Copenhagen Business School. I'm from the United States, but I've been living in Denmark for the last 8 years. And I basically, instead of just sending out the news, I basically break it down to make it to make people understand what geopolitics is, or how did we get here in this situation because of my background in history. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. So thank you in advance. Let's talk. I'm still collecting the question, but if everybody want to start, like what is happening now globally, we will talk in specific question that I'm collecting later, maybe in the next 15 minutes. The beginning we will chat a little bit. So it's the same time, like clockwise, if we can take some minutes each, and then we will answer to the question. Ian, if you want to say something, your opinion of the last days, Ukrainian counteroffensive, Caps Bridge, whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, the last month in the war has been rather interesting, to say the least. I mean, first we have these major Ukrainian offensives where it appears they've taken back large, vast areas of territory. The reasons for which, I think are up for debate. I've heard several different things. I mean, one, the typical Western narrative, which might be true, is just that the Russian army is weaker and the Ukrainian army is stronger. Another possible, and I think more possible, explanation for this opportunity that's been presented to the Ukrainian side is I've gotten some information recently that kind of lines up with media narratives that were coming out in early February, that Russian contract forces actually ended their contracts sometime in August. So some of the audience might actually remember this, but many of these contract troops were due to be sent home in January or February, and the Russian government actually extended those contracts and were basically like, no, you're serving 6 more months, like it or not. And they extended them to August. So once August came around, the Russian government had the choice of either letting these soldiers finally go home, 6 months after they were supposed to, or, forcing them to stay longer and potentially dealing with some kind of mutiny on their hands. So, the latest information, and I'd like to know what everyone else thinks of it, is that potentially between 35 and 50,000 Russian troops that were in Ukraine out of the total amount, whether it had been 150 or 200,000, actually went home in August and significantly weakened Russia's position on some of these front lines, which caused them to kind of go into I guess you can say like a damage, a damage assessment mode where they were basically like, well, what fronts are most important to us? And obviously the Zaporozhye front is probably the single most important front, because if Ukraine can manage to cut the land bridge between Crimea and Russia, that would be disastrous. And then apart from that, Kherson is, Kherson and then Mariupol, which is part of the Zaporozhye front, the 2 largest cities that the Russians have captured so far, I think got the priority in that situation. And it presented Ukraine with an enormous opportunity to take back a lot of ground and several very important logistical hubs in northern Kharkiv. So that, combined with these announcements of Russian mobilization and the recent strikes on the Kerch Bridge, and then even today with the strikes all throughout Ukraine, have made a very, very interesting month.
Union.
All right, I'll start out with a comment on Ian's analysis of the circulation or transfer of the troops. I agree with the assessment that there is some 40,000 troops who have left because of the contract has ended. I think that is a factual statement rather than a assessment, as they all serve 1-year terms after the new mobilization laws from 2021. And because of that, they have to stop in February, and then they extended it. I think to counteract that issue, they created this volunteer group of 30 to 40,000 troops who they trained over the summer and were supposed to get there by the end of summer, around August, as you mentioned. However, I think those conscripts or contractors actually left a bit earlier than they expected, or that the training took longer than they expected. So there was this gap in the troops who were in the Kharkiv section, and there wasn't enough troops because the rotation hasn't finished yet, as the new troops were still traveling to the location by the time the Ukrainians attacked. The Ukrainians took advantage of the situation where the Russians were weakest because they were rotating some troops out, and the ones who were supposed to rotate in hadn't arrived yet. Other than that, I think the most important things that have happened in the past few days is, of course, as you mentioned, the Kerch Bridge attack, as well as the partial mobilization. So the partial mobilization mobilizes 300,000 troops, and according to Russian sources, they have so far conscripted 200,000 of those 300,000, and they have started training in different areas. So from my information, the training is happening inside Ukraine in the Russian annexed regions in the south, the four regions that they recently annexed. And the way that this training is ongoing is that they actually pick troops who have fought in this war so far and have them as coaches and teachers to teach these new soldiers how to participate and how to fight this war based on the experience that they have received over these 6 to 7 months that they have been fighting. And this way they are close to the battlefield, so once they are needed, they can be sent quickly, and then I think they'll just keep training them until they are needed. So in case Ukraine starts a counteroffensive in the Kherson region, they have a contingent of these mobilized troops in Kherson who are training there, and then if they're needed, they send them quickly. And so with the other regions, so they are split over all 4 regions, and they are sent where they are needed, when they are needed. So they're trying to stall it as long as possible to keep as much training as possible before they're sent to battle. And I think that's it for a quick answer.
Thanks, Wib. DPA, if you want to start.
Okay, so I think everybody following the war should realize there is a very heavy missile barrage, missile strikes all across Ukraine. And also 2 days ago, in my report, they appointed a new commander, a new general to oversee the entire military operation. So I'm talking about the Russian side, not the Ukrainian side, in case you guys are not sure. And then we also saw that the partial mobilization, 2/3 of them has already been in the military around a week ago, and by now, a good number of them has already finished 2 weeks of training. So we will be seeing them coming to Ukraine. Probably while we speak, they are already on the way. And then we have the Ukrainian hit the Crimean Bridge. And then you have the Putin going to the Security Council. He made some statements, and then he literally ordered the strikes to kind of like revenge for the Crimean Bridge attack. And then Belarusian making moves. And then you can see there's also news, also reported in my CREP today, that the EU has called on all their embassies to evacuate from Kiev. And then we have the American embassy calling all the Americans to leave Ukraine. And then Red Cross also say they will cease operation in Ukraine for now, which means that you have a consecutive multiple things happening all together, pointing to something bad is going to happen. And it is kind of unnerving, or something to really take notice about. Things, maybe we are looking at the beginning of the real war, what the pro-Russians like to say, the real war. Because as far as for the pro-Russian side, the war haven't even started yet. To them, this is just a military operation. This is just it's something like USA going to Afghanistan. It's not a war to them. although they call it the war on terror, but it's just nonsense. It's just a special military operation, like they send forces to Somalia or whatever. To Russia, this is the status of the war in Ukraine. It's supposed to be a small military operation, but we might be witnessing the beginning of the real war that Russia can wage. Because I'm telling people on Twitter that we are not even seeing 10% of what Russia can do in a total war situation. And some people don't understand what it means. So we know that maybe there's between 250,000 to 300,000 max troops that has been involved in the military operation from the beginning to now. And then we are going to get another 300,000 coming in. Maybe some already rotated out. So let's say we have 200,000 now in Ukraine, and another 300,000 is going to come. Maybe there's another 200,000 of volunteers, 500,000. But if you look at what Russia can do, their military reserve is 25 million. 10% of 25 million is 2.5 million troops. We are not even at 10% of what Russia can actually do in an actual war, which is why I say we are probably just witnessing the beginning of Russia going into second gear, what I like to call. Because at the moment, they are just running on first gear. They are not taking this thing as seriously. But we might be at the beginning, to start to see things getting serious. And then with the annexation, because I don't think they are supposed to annex the territory now. They're supposed to annex the territory after capturing Donetsk and Luhansk fully. Suddenly they announce annexation. I think it's premature. So there might be this impetus to ramp up the war. And this is just my opinion, how I'm looking at the current situation right now. So
I moved to them the history because Eric will show a little bit about his experience in Ukraine. So if you want to put your opinion, we will finish with Eric.
Sure thing. I think I'm going to first, not a correction. It's more like an add-on. Since you said that since the Russian side has a new leader of command. Yes, his name was, I think it was Sergei Surovikin is what his name. And even though he was appointed 2 days ago, this is his first actual day, which reconstructs the new perspective of what this special military operation is about. That is what we know. Now, in terms of like when it comes to add on to the conjunction of you saying that this is a new perspective in the war and this could be something else, I definitely agree with that. This is all of a sudden now it's showing that how can I say, are we at the beginning of something new, or is this really something that the beginning of what Russia's capable of? Because they've been showing that they've been able to lose a lot of their equipment, and it's been running dry as times goes on. They've been using a lot of military. They've been using a lot of shelling that's been going on through the east, and sometimes they're not able to relocate it. Distribution seems to be its biggest enemy right now, which is always the biggest mission in any kind of war, is logistics. That sometimes they need to get it transported from Belarus instead of central Russia at the same time. And that's what I'm seeing. Now, to get another 300,000 people either into the front lines or to help out the logistics, how much of that actually helps? How much of that will be precise to actually help the war effort? Now, what comes to me is that this war is now not going to be concluded quickly. I don't see Ukraine having the manpower to push every single Russian out before Christmas. If anyone thought that this war would be settled before Christmas, that is now off the table. Unless if they come to the negotiating table, which for things that have not been reached out yet, nobody knows. But this war looks like it's going to be coming into 2023 and 2024, none the least. And as it escalates, as it gets bigger, and if we'll talk about Belarus, I'm sure we're going to speak about it soon. How long does it take until it trickles down until one comes into the other? Does it take a year or two? Kind of the same situation that you see in World War I, where you saw it, and World War II. You would see things happen not immediately. It's gradual, and that's usually the take that we're getting at. I'll stop right there, and I'll let you fill it in, Eric.
Eric, if you want to share
Sure.
your pictures, only to have a chance to show your experience, because Eric was in Ukraine just 2 weeks ago. So he went in Kharkiv and in Kiev. Okay, let me check. Perfect. So Eric, if you want to fastly show your picture and describe them.
Yeah, sure. So,
Okay, go.
as some of you may know, I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago. I came back from Kiev, 2 weeks ago. So I was there as a photojournalist. I spent the first week in Kharkiv, and the second week I spent it in Kiev. So I took some photos. The rest are uploaded on my Instagram account. If you're interested, go take a look. So on my first day, I went in Kiev region. We saw um, a Russian column that was shelled from the sky in Kiev region in March, I guess, if I remember, March or April. Yeah, I think it's more March. Mm, on the next slide, you can see some other pictures of the tanks there that were there. These are some T-72, and you can clearly see on some pictures here on the right, left, um, on the far left, the tank was completely blown up. So next, I was on the exhibition of Russian trophies in Kiev. It was in the center of Kiev, in front of the Saint Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. You can see some destroyed missiles, vehicles. There are even MSTAS artillery, which was pretty impressive to see from my eyes. So I went in Kharkiv just after that. So you can see some picture I took it was in the center of the city. So there I was there during the offensive in Kharkiv region. So it was pretty scary because we were shelled every night, and there was also the how do you call it, air raid alert that wakes me every night also. Um, so I visited. I was taken to Saltivka, which was one of the most destroyed part in Ukraine. The There was also we could go into an apartment, as you can see here. So on the second week, I was back in Kiev, as you can see here. In the center of Kiev, there are no destruction, no real destruction from the shellings. But if you go directly into the occupied areas, you can clearly see the destruction. In the middle, it was a window factory, and on the right, there was a building which was the theater of a battle with a BMP-1, which is exposed in the exhibition in Kiev. Next, it was in Bucha. It was a sort of culture house. And on the right top hand corner, it was a sort of mall, and above that, it was the state university. Next, it was the car cemetery in Irpin. I met some international journalists there. There was a Japanese journalist that lived in Paris, and we could also discuss from the war and the opinion of the Japanese people. Also, the most destroyed part in Irpin, which you can see on the pictures from the ministers that are coming in Ukraine to see the damage in Kiev region. And because I'm a tank addict, I couldn't resist going to the tank museum there. And it's the view from the hill in the museum. So it's Kiev in the background. Thank you. And I want to thank also my friends in Ukraine that helped me. And it it is a big project because I covered the war since like now 2 years, like far before the war in Ukraine. I was covering the war in Donbass, and going there was a sort of achievement. So thank you.
Eric, thank you. I have like some questions for you, firstly. So there is applause from the speakers. So, okay, one, it was like if you see any signs of Ukrainians are willing to sue for peace or capitulate, or they remain defiant. What is like your let's say sensation about the Ukrainian mood?
So I could constate that Ukrainians are in a pretty good mood because when I was there was the Kharkiv offensive. So they saw they were winning some ground. They liberated Izium, Kupiansk, Balaklia, and many other cities. And I saw that they are gaining sort of hope, I can say that, of winning. And now it's in Kherson region that they are winning some ground.
Okay, gotcha. So there was other question for you, Eric, but we will pass later. So this is the same question that I received in any stream, so I will put it to everybody because from the last stream there is some news about this strange tweet about Elon Musk that is like my first thought when we start in February to talk about it. But for me, the best solution for a peace was like to concede the recognition of Crimea internationally, and maybe an autonomy of the occupied part of Donbass, like in Italy that we have Alto Adige Sud Tirol, that it's part of Italy, but it's technically on the let's say control of their right by Austria, because they are German-speaking provinces. So it's a similar it's a similar province like Donbass for Ukraine. But in your point of view, what are some reasonable concession that Russia can offer that you can think Ukraine can accept to the end of the war? Ian?
Well, I mean, I didn't think that the peace offer that he had was well. Here's a couple of facts about it. So, the majority of Ukrainians would never accept the peace deal that he proposed. The majority of Russians would never accept the peace deal that he proposed, and the majority of people he pulled on Twitter don't accept it, which tells me it's probably the best possible deal that could be achieved. Usually good peace deals don't really make anyone happy. I think that, I mean, but like, there were some obviously some details there that people weren't upset about. Like, he did give like a 4 or 5 point peace plan, and polled the public on all of those points. And then I believe he gave a separate poll where he basically said, do the populations of the occupied regions have the right to decide their own future, which most people agreed with. I think it was like 60%. And I think most people in the world would agree with that as well. So, I mean, I think that a potential peace deal that Russia and Ukraine might accept, I think Ukraine would have to regain some territory out of it, because they have been, doing, like, let's say if like the peace deal was offered right now, and they feel as if on the battlefield they've been winning, so it would be ridiculous for them to sign on to a peace deal and give up more territory. And for Russia, I think maybe giving up all of their claims on the East Bank, or I'm sorry, the West Bank of the Dnieper, in return for official recognition of all the rest of the territory they captured, might that might be in the cards. It would be difficult because Kherson would be within, like, the city of Kherson would be within that territory, and they might not want to give that up. But having some kind of international recognition of all the most of the territory that they have already, and having the Dnieper in between them and the Ukrainian side, at least in some places, would be an advantageous border for them. So possibly that. But I mean, honestly, I'm not of the opinion that either side will accept in a peace deal right now. So I'm really just snowballing here.
Okay, but but my point of view, it's like that we have to think that we don't have really only two parts. So let's see what China will do, because today was pushing more than usual. So I don't know. Also US, because US is silent today a little bit. So about concession of giving a long-range missile to Ukraine, we're not saying nothing. So my sources, but from Italy, it's like that there are very, very deep, let's say, sort of kind of finding a deal between US and Russia. But it's like an international pressure that it's made mostly by China, because probably China have a lot of problems in the next recession. So a long war is not good for Chinese economy. They have already other problems. So let's see. Web Union, if you are there, or we will pass to. Okay, let's move to DPA.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the question is a bit weird. So because it's like, what should Russia give to Ukraine in order for Ukraine to accept a peace? I think the question is opposite.
Yeah. You're right. It's like let's say what the two parts can give.
Because the war has reached a point where it's no longer up to Ukraine. It's now the other way around. What should Ukraine give to Russia in order for Russia to stop fighting? Because as much as before this point, maybe before October, it was, when would Ukraine stop fighting? Russia is like waiting for Ukraine. When are you going to stop fighting? Then we can actually negotiate. But now is not the case. Russia has committed a partial mobilization. They have annexed the 4 regions, and they have already said that they will recapture the entire of Zaporizhia, the entire of Donetsk, the entire of Kherson. Now the situation is reversed. What Ukraine can give to Russia for Russia to stop, and the Russia will not stop. It doesn't matter what Ukraine say now. Actually, Russia will continue the operation until they capture the entire of Zaporizhia, entire of Donetsk, entire of Luhansk, entire of Kherson. So that's why I say the question is kind of in reverse, because Ukraine have made it very clear they don't want to negotiate anymore. They want Russia entirely out of Ukraine. So basically, there's nothing Russia can give Ukraine for Ukraine to give up. So for Russia's case is that they will just go all the way. until Ukraine can no longer fight anymore. That is how I view the situation now. I do not have this kind of optimistic outlook in terms of this war anymore, because we have already passed that stage. The moment Putin or the Russian leadership decided that, okay, that's it, we're going to annex the region, and they go on to do it, despite that on paper it just look inappropriate, because they haven't even captured the entire of Zaporizhia. They only have half of Donetsk, and Ukraine is invading into Luhansk. It's like, and also into Kherson. It's like, it's not an appropriate annexation, but Russia go for it anyway, which means that Russia has reached a point where they have reached a tipping point, and okay, forget it, that's it, man. We're just going to do it our way. And this is what I see. Which is why my position has changed. As per if you ask the same question last month, I would have said something different. But the situation on the ground has changed to the point where I think it's no longer about Ukraine anymore. It's about Russia. It's whether Russia want to stop or not. And in my opinion, there's a lot of hawks on the Russian side, especially Kadyrov. He has proven himself, mobilized so many troops from Chechnya, trains all the volunteers. All the volunteers from Russia, if I'm not wrong, all go to Chechnya for training. So if I'm not wrong, I might be wrong, but if I'm not wrong, they are all trained in Chechnya, which means that he has gained a lot of influence through this war, and his influence that he want to conquer and fight all the way to Kiev, right? He put it really, really clear, and that will be a political pressure on Putin to because Putin is the sane one. He's the one that is rational. He's trying to hold back, which is why Russia is always fighting with one hand. But then you have the hawks that is around him, trying to really punch Ukraine to the floor. So, and Putin is starting to crack. He's like he cannot take it anymore. He's starting to let go. So we are seeing. That's why I said there was a change. I feel that there's a change, and I think it's very hard to stop Russia at this moment. But this is my point of view.
Thanks, DPA. Dam Mystery, I pass to you because I skip Web Union and we will go to him at the end.
Sounds good. I like this musical chair. It's the way we're going about it. It's kind of fun, to be honest. I'm not sure if I should relay on to what DPA says or to the beginning of the question with the Elon Musk. So I guess I'll do a blend of that. To follow on with what Ian said, it is true. Elon Musk has good intentions. He's a very logical. He's very intelligent. The one thing he didn't understand is that he doesn't. He's sitting from his where does he live in California and seeing it through his window. It's kind of like if you're living in a first world country and or like somewhere like in Scandinavia where I live, and you see that the world around you is burning, but you think that it could never happen to you, and you think that it's crazy because you're watching through your window instead of actually being there. Now, we're not in Ukraine, but when you get there, you just notice that the people will not take the negotiation as per se. It used to be that the negotiations used to come to the table on Ukraine all the time saying, let's settle this. We'll take the territory, leave you the rest. But Ukraine will not take that. And then the situation goes with history. It's kind of like, well, what do you call it? Oh, now it's the word is on the top of my head, but basically it's like, when would be the next time until Russia's ready to invade again? Would that be in 5 years, 10 years? It seems to be that motion is like Ukraine says, let's settle this now. It has to be all or nothing at this point, and we're not going to settle. Russia has to get fully away, which is a very heartfelt, very hopium community. But to follow on what DPA said, that's where the restructure comes in. You're starting to see another restructure in the leadership, another tactic, a new strategy, a new approach. Now, something that we've seen a little bit before is the attack of civil infrastructure. It used to be trying to focus just on hitting military all the time. But now that we're hitting more civil infrastructure, and it seems to be that that's going to be a thing that's going to be for the next couple of months, for the next quarter, you're going to see more civilian infrastructure getting hit again. If it gets repaired, it's going to be hit again, and it's going to get that much more aggressive, and there will be more civilian casualties in between, which means that it starts to stir up and rile up more hatred between each other. Now, in terms of leadership, there was a time where there was a breakdown between like the hardliners of the Russian oligarch and between Putin's close allies. And then you have Kadyrov, that's the Chechens, who spoke out and criticized the Ministry of Defense lack of perception to notice these counteroffensive successes and everything. And it's both a yay and nay on Putin's part for allowing him to move up as a colonel general. I think that's, correct me if is that what the rank is called, colonel general? Correct. Then because it shows two things. It shows a bit of desperation, but it shows that one, that he's become a hardliner and that he really means it, that he can rally behind. But it's two, it's showing that Putin cannot afford to lose allies like Kadyrov because he has 20,000 Chechens ready to mobilize. And because of that, you cannot do that. What happened the last time that the Chechens were here? They were doing nothing but dance. No, they're still dancing. They're always happy people. But they were dancing and then they were shooting, and you see nothing but videos. There was a month for March and April. All you saw was Chechens fighting. Then they got tired and then they left. Now they're coming back with it. Now he got them mobilized and coming back. Will they stay longer? How much longer? Or will they leave again? We've also seen some Chechens start to separate and will move over to the Ukrainian side. A small amount, not much, but we have seen Chechen fighters with the armbands and the braces of Ukrainians fighting on behalf of the Ukrainians, because Chechnya in itself, with all of its history, is not together all in one. There's a lot of separate units or separation in the Chechen government or their state as well. One last subject I want to take on was actually where Belarus stands in this, because Belarus is very unique. Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, the president, has shown, who's nearly been there for 30 years now, since 1994, I think. He's he's shown that he still owes a lot to the old Soviet Empire, to Russia, but he also is trying to distance himself. But at the same time, he also knows that he needs Russia at the same time. So he's a bit of a wild card. What am I gonna get? Why am I bringing this on? To bring this back to the main point of what you were talking about, was just like Chechnya, if he decides to mobilize his units and go to war, there is a large segment that's more anti-war in Belarus than there is in Chechnya and Russia. They are the civilians are really against him, and to mobilize a war. And if it goes wrong, then he will lose his stance in the regime if there's a new coup d'état or whatever you want to say. And that's what another thing that I'm sure we can get onto. It's a whole new discussion, but I think that's how I'll bring it around from now. I'll end myself.
Thank you, Web Union, and then we will move to the next question. The question was simple, because you were away. Like, what Ukraine or Russia can give up to make a peace treaty?
Okay, so I take this question as, what concessions do each side have to do for a peace to be reached in Ukraine? And I believe that the best option for each side, which neither will agree to, because they both are going for maximum, because they have invested so much in this. And for either side to make a concession now, they need to fight for much more time and suffer much more losses before either side are willing to give up on this war. Because Ukraine is seeing this as their own great patriotic war, similar to the great patriotic war of the Second World War, the Soviet Union versus Germany. They're seeing this as an existential threat that is attacking them and are threatening their existence. And by Ukraine, I mean the leadership, because the current stance of Ukraine is heavily defined by its leadership, because they have a very strong leadership. They have Zelensky, who is politically very powerful and is very good at negotiating and playing to the feelings of the people in the West, while we have the commander-in-chief of the armed forces in Ukraine, who is very, very harsh and very strong and heavy-handed when it comes to this fight. He commands the Ukrainian soldiers in a in a way that he doesn't really care about the feelings. He just cares about the results, and he wants to achieve those results. So he puts everything he can to reach those results. And at the same time, we have Russia, who is so much more powerful militarily than Ukraine, and has a much larger population. And then Russia also has these, as we mentioned, Belarus and Chechnya, who are very autonomous, but still a part of Russia. So if Russia tells them to do something, then they will do it. Even if they are unwilling, they will still be forced to do it because they are so heavily reliant on Russia. And with Russia's superior military force, they are able to, as long as they are willing to, they are able to win this war. They can suffer much more losses than Ukraine is able to, and they have much stronger economy and so on. The industry is extremely at a higher level than Ukraine's because of how much the Russian airstrikes have hit all the Ukrainian industry since the start of the war. And now with the attacks on the energy infrastructure, Ukraine is in a horrible condition economically and production way perspective, which means that Ukraine is currently completely reliant on Western support to keep the war going. If the West stops supporting Ukraine, they will collapse at a very fast rate, as they will run out of any resupplies, as well as their Starlink that they use for communication and information and decision making and all of these things. They all come from the West. Without the West, Ukraine collapses and Russia wins. So Russia is currently trying to win this war by attacking the economy and the energy sector of the West. They're trying to infiltrate Western society with fear of the winter, which will be cold, and there'll be no heating in the houses and so on. Germany is on high alert because of the political unrest that will happen because of the lack of energy. I have just been to Germany 2 weeks ago, and I was also there last year at the same time. And people's feelings and the way I talk with people and all of these things have completely changed. People have become much more negative and unhappy than they were last year, because they are seeing the future as something that is not as bright as they would last year. Last year, they were thinking COVID is over, we are returning to good times, we'll be moving out of this recession. And now the inflation is just hit 10%. In Denmark, and I also think it's very similar in Germany. So the people are becoming poorer, and we're looking into a cold winter. So Russia wants to take advantage of that to push the West from supporting Ukraine and reach a peace treaty like that. We know from Ukrainian media that in April, Zelensky actually wanted to make peace with Russia. They were ready to make some small concessions in exchange for peace, like becoming neutral and giving up the Donbass, letting them have a referendum. However, Boris Johnson came personally to tell him, don't do that. And this is according to Ukrainian media. So we actually see that Ukraine is willing to reach a peace settlement, but the West is not. So to reach a peace settlement and end this war, it has to be between Russia and the West, because Ukraine was willing to fight or continue fighting or make a peace treaty. That depends on whether or not the West gives support, because they know without the Western support, they cannot win. So Boris Johnson came, he said, we will support you to win this war. So don't make a peace treaty, and they didn't. So now we're in this situation now.
Perfect. Just an update about like the winter is coming. Like everybody is giving bad news. I'm trying to give one good. So actually, like the storage in Italy, it's next to 100%, and we have like the biggest storage of gas in Europe if you check with Germany. And now the problem is like that the gas prices is going down on the spot market. It's not going high. And Italy is selling its gas. So as I forecasted some months ago, probably the route of gas will not go north to south, but south to north. So, and another good information or strange, it's that the gas supplies from Russia was cut off 0% about 10 days ago for a bureaucratic problem through Austria, but magically some days ago returned back to 100%. This is why the problem of trading with Russian Federation now, it's a little bit tricky, because you cannot trust them as a supplier like before. And the gas pipeline to Italy, it's passing through Ukraine, and it's working completely. So it's also the infrastructure that the Russians are attacking. It's not the infrastructure that is bringing gas to the Southern Europe. So it's an interesting thing, because they're making some attacks to thermal plants or whatever, but not their infrastructure to export gas to Southern Europe. To Germany, yes. So my opinion is that, as you said, web union, it's like to weaken the let's say popularity of the German government. And also the other thing is that Ursula von der Leyen it's German also. So maybe like this feeling to attack the European unity with this thing, it's like a Russian strategy. Another information about that I wanted to give, and I will pass to the next question. As you know, I went many times in Russia, minimum 1 month and a half for a year in the last 6 years. And I have many friends there, and there is a huge flood of people that is crossing the border, also my friends. Only in Kazakhstan, over 100,000 people were crossing the border by feet, because it's the only border that is allowed without a car. And the Kazakh people are hosting a lot of people like this. But the main problem is that because Kazakhstan and all the former Soviet Republic were relying economically to Russia, the prices for the high price and high level of ruble, it's going up in Russia. So also the prices in all the former Soviet Union republics is going very high. So very expensive to live also in Kazakhstan, Georgia, or whatever. They are passing through these republics to go final destination Turkey, because it's the only state with, let's say, the currency is very low, so it's affordable for the Russians. So Georgia and Kazakhstan, it's not so cheap to live now for them, for the people who are flooding up. So question is not 42, that is like our super subscriber from Kabardino-Balkaria from Russia. What condition might lead to the United States using nuclear weapons first? And the same, the question was, what would Russia do if NATO does provocation with a nuclear weapon and try to blame it on Russia? Yeah, or Albania, if you want to start, okay.
All right. So nuclear weapons between Russia and the United States, or NATO in general, is so far from reality right now that we shouldn't even be asking the question. Nuclear war will only happen in a situation where either Russia or the United States is a threat of collapse, like utter collapse of the country, to the point where the leadership is about to be assassinated or killed in their house, in the White House or in the Kremlin, because of protesters destroying everything, or the opponent's army literally being at the gates of Moscow or Washington, D.C., about to take control of the country. That's the only situation where I see either country using nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons is, as it has been since the Cold War and during the Cold War, mutual assured destruction. It's literally, the abbreviation is literally MAD, because it's mad to think about it. As both sides agree completely that if either side uses nuclear weapons, both countries and most of the world gets utterly destroyed to the point where we cannot return to normalcy again. Of course, it will not be a complete human extinction, but the economy will completely collapse. We'll see something that is much, much worse than the Great Depression, and we'll see a lot of disease. Society will collapse, political situation will collapse, and we will generally, no one wants that for anyone. Even if you have evil intentions, I really hope no devil would be so crazy to think we will need to use nuclear weapons. So yeah, I think it is out of the question in this war for nuclear weapons to be used, except for small yield nuclear weapons. They may be used if Russia gets completely destroyed by the Ukrainians. Then they may use it, as it is actually legal under the Russian doctrine to use them without being in danger or all of these things. Small yield nuclear weapons are 1 kiloton nuclear weapons, which have an explosion radius of about 100 meters. So it's nothing compared to strategic nuclear weapons.
When you refer to low yield nuclear weapons, you're referring to like nuclear artillery fired from like tulip mortars and stuff. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. I would counter the last point too. I don't really see, well, I mean, not really counter, but like I don't see any situation where Russia is, still sees the war through the lens of we can win this thing, where they're even launching smaller tactical nuclear weapons. Like the international backlash that would come from even Russia's friends abroad would be uh, absolutely monstrous. Like no one wants to see any kind of nuclear weapon detonated. In fact, I would suggest, and this is just my personal opinion, like living in America and seeing the media here going on, and then I look at the propaganda and stuff coming out of Russia every day. Uh, the most of the talk about the use of nuclear weapons is coming from the West, and it's coming through the lens of, you know Russia's going to use them, but it's Western media, in my opinion, that is blowing it out of proportion and really scaring people. As far as I'm aware, outside of Putin's speech like 1 or 2 weeks ago, there really hasn't been very much said from the Russians. And to get into like the specifics of what Putin said, he basically, I don't even think he actually said, the words that we would launch nukes against anyone. He said that for anyone thinking about intervening in the conflict, like we have very powerful weapons, some more advanced than those that the West has, and that's basically what Putin said. And from there, the topic and the discussion has moved into Western media, where I mean, in my opinion, they've completely blown it out of proportion. But I completely agree with Weeb Union's assessment there, that we're so far from any kind of nuclear conflict breaking out. I mean, and in fact, like the talk of it, like the more you talk about it, that's probably one of the things that like makes it more likely. But that's why I prefer not to talk about it. I don't really talk about it on my channel because I don't see it as a possibility. At least definitely not in this stage of the conflict. Hopefully not ever.
Yeah, I don't think nuclear weapon will be used either. I think the question just now was, what are the conditions that USA might use nuclear weapon? So the only condition is that nuclear weapon is used on United States soil. Otherwise, there is no way USA will actually use nuclear weapon. The same goes for Russia. The chances of them using nuclear weapon is extremely low. Like I said, no, Russia has not even started going to the second gear in the war, so there is no reason for them to use nuclear weapon. It's not even tactical nuclear weapons at this moment. I can't even see it happening. It has to be like 2 years down the road we are having this still having this discussion 2 years down, and then Russia has already mobilized like 4 million troops, and then they're still unable to conquer Ukraine, and the entire Ukraine is just one no man's land. And then maybe in that kind of circumstances is like, fuck it, they just gonna drop the nuclear weapon, that kind of situation. And even when Russia use a nuclear weapon, the United States also may not use the nuclear weapon, because whoever use it first will become the bogeyman. Like what Ian has said, you will suddenly, even if you're in United States, you will suddenly lose all your friends. Like nowhere in the world the politicians will be able to convince their population that it is okay to continue to be friends with a country that deployed nuclear weapons against even nothing, perhaps. Now, for example, in a war situation, because once you use nuclear weapon, the game changed, and it means that it's open warfare. You can just use nuclear weapon anytime, because if you can use it once, why not use it twice? It makes no difference. So which is why this proliferation of nuclear weapons or nuclear warfare is not wanted by anyone. I also I think I tweeted or I commented. I think I tweeted. I said no one. You do not do things that you do not want other people to do it to you. I shared on Twitter, which means that if you do not want people to use nuclear weapon on you, don't use nuclear weapon at all. So this is the same thing, which actually I was criticizing about the Crimean Bridge thing. If you don't want people to hit your infrastructure, don't hit other people's infrastructure. So once you hit it, then of course you are inviting Russia to hit yours. So that was the context why I posted that. But this seems applies to nuclear weapon, chemical weapon, biological weapon, which is why no one uses chemical and biological weapons anymore since World War One, because after they are on the receiving end, they realize that it's not worth it. So you don't start. Once you start, people will start to use it also. Then there's no win. So which is why nuclear weapon is the same thing. It's just for deterrence purposes.
Damn history.
Sure thing. I think as I look at you guys, when you brought up the word nuclear weapons, I could see in everyone's eyes, everyone looks calm. Everyone looks like we're relaxed. But we also realize that our audience is also a lot of casuals that we're speaking. Like, I'm on TikTok. I'm not saying I speak to a lot of 15-year-olds, so there are a few. My age range is actually between 24 to 35, 30 or something, which is surprising, which is in my age range. There's a lot of people older, and of course there's a lot of teenagers that are 17, 18, young 20s, but they're the ones asking the questions and always coming to me every live stream I do, which I go on like every other day. They're always asking me, is nukes an option? Is nuclear is going to happen? Even when I was live right a few seconds ago on my second laptop, while I'm showing you guys as well, they're asking the question, is nukes going to happen? So this is a good topic to talk about, because this was literally when I went live. Now, to you guys, when it comes to nukes, it is out of the question. We can all agree. From a historical standpoint, I agree with everything you guys are saying. My biggest weakness now, just to talk about my qualifications, is military expertise. Like, when it comes to the military technology, I am an economist and I am a historian. The least thing, which I'm still learning, is when it comes to, like, when you Ian and Weeb were talking about tactical nukes and all that. I was like, damn, how many levels are there? I actually don't know. Like, you were telling me about the 100-meter and the 1 kilometer and everything. I'm like, okay. But anyways, moving forward with nuclear warfare, the way I started to build on it when I started to speak to my audience is whether it would be a thing. It is a news media scare because it is an easy topic to talk about. As soon as a nuclear submarine goes on its exercise mission, we go scared. But then we also see that nukes are also being transported, and I think it was actually last week where we saw nukes going towards, was it Belgrade or somewhere close. And it is something that you see actually happen. If you pay attention to geopolitics or pay attention to the situation, you see that it happens very often. They move the nukes and everything, and they're relocating them, whether it's an exercise or whether it's a new thing. They do it annually. But when you're brand new and because of this war is hot, this scares everyone that's a casual because they don't know about it, which means that it's very sensational for the media to talk about. Now, what happens? The question, if nukes were to go out, does Russia really want to? You have to ask. This is what I ask my audience: would Russia really want to do a nuke on something like Ukraine and think that they can get away with it? I think at the same time, if you're the United States, yes, it hurts Europe because they're very close and everyone that's around the mainland. Like DPA just said, you won't have any allies. Nobody's going to trust you, whether it's the next regime or in a century. If the current regime, if you start to do nuclear weapons at that point, while USA will be happy because at the same time, then all of a sudden they showed how desperate Russia was, and at the same time they will be untouchable. They will get to unleash it havoc on Russia if that was to be the case without getting touched, and then Russia doing it all for what? For Ukraine? It doesn't make sense in that sense. So nukes are out of the question until further progression. But yeah.
I'll go ahead and just because you mentioned, I will go ahead and show you guys what exactly Weeb and I were talking about. This is called a this is a 2S4 Tulpan, or I think NATO calls it the Tulip, and it's a heavy tracked mortar, basically, as you can see here, and they have basically small, what they call battlefield tactical nuclear weapons that are essentially the size of a mortar shell that can be fired through these things, and they can, they have a very small blast radius compared to a regular nuclear weapon, but in an area like what Weeb was talking about, like within 100 meters, you're talking about like total evisceration of anything. So they're supposedly really good for eliminating like troop concentrations that are close to the front lines of the battlefield. Russia has buttloads of these things, lots of like the launcher itself, but a lot of the small nuclear weapons that can go into them as well. So they would be used, not necessarily like danger close, but they can get out like 20 miles from like the front line. So you can hit enemy targets like 20 miles from you and be safe in terms of like out of the blast range. But I'll give it back to you, Stefano.
I would also
Okay,
like to
Web, if you want to talk,
Yeah.
then I will finish.
Yeah. So a quick note on, I don't know if it will be quick, but I started out saying that it's basically impossible for nukes to be used in this war. However, I think that it will be used in the future after this war is over. Because from what I see in this war is that the rhetoric between Russia and the West has completely broken down. It's very difficult to imagine friendly relations between these two countries as long as a pro-Putin leader follows Putin after his time is over. Because regardless, even if he continues until his death, he's 70 years old now. We don't know how long he will live. He could die tomorrow for all we know. His life is unpredictable. As long as Russia continues down this road of their own interest over everyone else's, and the West denounces all of this, there will eventually come some kind of direct conflict between these two sides. Because currently the only country that is neutral between NATO and Russia is Ukraine. By taking down Ukraine, the border becomes straight between Russia and the West, similar to the Cold War. There's always been this rhetoric during the Cold War that war would never happen because mutual assured destruction, nuclear weapons. However, we see from this that conventional war can happen. And if not in Europe, then somewhere else in the world, because Russia's heavily pushing for a multipolar world together with China and India and other countries that is far away from the center of the world these past 100 years. And they want to create a part of the world where they reign supreme and can do whatever they want within their own interests. So far, they have been giving concessions to the West and the ones who lead the world. But that is fading now as other countries become richer and more powerful to defend their own interests. We see China and India specifically pushing for whatever they want instead of having to follow whatever someone else tells them to do. And we see that with organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We see that with Brics and so on. And eventually this will end up in some kind of war. I don't believe the Second World War is the final world war we will ever see. If it happens in 10 years or in 50 years or in 100 years or in 1,000 years, I don't know. But I do believe as long as nuclear weapons exist, at some point they will be used. As they have been used in the past, they will be used in the future as well.
Okay, so now I'm happier. No, I'm kidding. So I was talking with some military people in Italy, and they said to me that if the West want to force Ukraine to make a peace deal with Russia, it's very easy, because the day that we will stop the weapon supply, Ukraine, it will be forced to make a deal. So the main thing is probably, as Ian said it before, the Ukrainians are trying to catch as more ground as they can before the winter. And there is also other movement. This is like a question that the other people is taking, like it's not 42. How did the OPEC oil production, and this is maybe for them history, because you are an economist, how did the OPEC oil production cut affect the energy situation in the European Union countries? And connected, do you think that the West have enough resources to help Ukraine to win the war?
I'm going to actually skip the first part of the question. My regards. The answer is because I never got around to actually seeing I know about the OPEC and I know about the cutoff with the oil, but I don't know the other side of it to answer that question. So usually you need both sides of it. I'm only hearing the negative aspect of it. I don't know the positive side of it to really understand. So I have not looked at any charts and everything. Do forgive me. My excuse will just be because I do a full-time job and then I go straight into this about the Ukrainian war. So I have not actually learned about it. And I think it's something that actually just happened over the weekend, like on Friday, Saturday. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I will re-update on that. Second part of the question, does the West have enough to give to Ukraine? Yeah. The simple answer is yes, they do have enough. When it comes to most of the stuff is coming from the United States, as we know, and as long as the NATO from the European side stays intact, which looks like they're very unified and very solid for at least the rest of the year, and for the first half of next year, it looks like that it will just be a easy flow going. Now, United States, when it comes to, I'm sure Ian knows this as well, when it comes to from the Republicans and Democrats, as much as domestic issues that they have of how to control their side, has nothing to do with how they handle international politics. They always agree, almost time and time again, when it comes to what happens with their interest abroad, and if that's helping if that's their interest with being Ukraine, they will both do it. It does not matter if the president's all the way from Bush to Trump to Biden and whoever the next two will be. That will stay as is. So I hope that's a simple one to answer. If anyone wants to answer the OPEC, be my guest.
I could go next on that.
Go.
So the way basically that I see like the energy situation in Europe, or like a good way to describe it, you have to think about a concept in economics called price elasticity. Like when you have like when a good is elastic, that means that like you have to buy it no matter what, doesn't matter. Like it's not like a new record player where it's like, oh, if I'm having a tough month, like I'm not gonna throw $100 down on this. So like if the price goes up 20% on a new record player, people just aren't going to buy them, right? But if price goes up or 20% on oil and gas, then it doesn't matter. Like people have to buy it. And these goods are like very inelastic. So like you can have like say like 0.5% shortage or like a 1% shortage, and it can cause like potentially like a 40 or 50% swing in price, because like that's what people freak out. They like rush to the gas station, like it causes like this extreme demand problem. And one of the issues I see with Europe and people like, and this is a big mistake I think people make, because they look at this situation with like the EU and Russia and they're like, oh, simple, like just buy someone else's oil, buy someone else's gas. Or like people, when they criticize Europe or they criticize the German government, they're like, well, it's their fault, they made the dumb decision to buy Russian gas all these years. Like Russia is connected to Europe. Russia is part of Europe. They're on the same continent. So like you're virtually saying that, like, if you imagine that you have a bathtub, right? And your goal in the next couple hours is to fill up your bathtub so you can take a bath. So you have two different options. You can either turn the faucet on which comes from that damn water company that you hate so much. Or you can say, you know what, I hate that water company, I'm not buying their water anymore. And you can start walking down to the river with a bucket and bringing buckets of water back and filling up your bathtub with. That's the situation that Europe is in right now, because you have they're like, oh, we can just stop buying this LNG or stop buying this gas from Russia that's piped right in, like connected to Germany or into Poland and these various places. We could just very easily just start buying, ships that come all the way across the world full of this hyper frozen and compressed gas, which is, very expensive. So like, I mean, you tell me like which is obviously more cheaper than the other. And this, even if there was enough oil in the world, which it appears like, you have the OPEC cuts and stuff, which are going to cause huge price swings, or if there's enough LNG gas in the world, that LNG gas is never going to be cheaper than piped gas. Not in your wildest dreams ever. It doesn't matter if you have a million LNG ships lined up from Qatar all the way to Europe and they just pipe it straight through all the ships. Like, it's not going to be cheaper than Russian gas. And the European economy was always going to suffer going with a different provider for gas than Russia. Always. So, I mean, that's what I think about the energy situation in Europe. In terms of what damned history has said about politics in America, I mean, essentially, I agree. Like, the Democratic and Republican parties have agreed on everything geopolitical and foreign policy wise since World War II. But I would argue that they won't always, and that the picture is changing very rapidly. Like say like the oncoming of Donald Trump, for example. Donald Trump um wasn't the last, but the first American president to get elected that wanted to withdraw us from NATO and wanted to back us out of some of these fights and stuff. This is a sentiment that's actually existed on. It's been growing on both sides of the political aisle in America for a very long time. I mean, a lot of people remember back to the Iraq War days. Like, it was the Republican Party that was far more hawkish on going into Iraq than the Democratic Party was. The Democratic Party is supposed to be the anti-war party, and now it's kind of getting twisted and flipped around where it's like really confusing. You definitely have very large portions of both parties now that don't want the U.S. involved in these various conflicts and don't want the U.S. involved in these wars and providing weapons to people, like weapons that are used to kill other people. I think that just for the time being, like, it's such a dramatic situation going on. A lot of people are just they're watching the media, whether it be Republican or whether it be conservative or liberal media, and they're getting their information from that. But like, as the years go on and as time passes, like in America, typically better information comes out about these things and people tend to change their minds. Like, there's so many different issues I can name in the past couple of years where people were gung-ho, like with the the mainstream public opinion on something, and then like months later new information came out and like the situation has changed. So in terms of like America's support for the war in Ukraine, I can't say that it would be indefinite. I truly think that if things in the Ukraine war were to start going bad, despite the fact that we're sending weapons, and the Republican side, which is the influence of the neocons and the traditional math and maps crowd of the Republicans has been decreasing dramatically, and the populist Republican side has been increasing the influence a lot. I think if you have a landslide victory of a lot of populist Republicans in November here in America, along with a deteriorating situation in Ukraine, you could see a significant drop in support for Ukrainian government, or at least bare minimum a drop in support for paying for the weapons we're sending them. Like, I don't think there's very many people in America that have a problem with selling weapons to Ukraine. I think most of the people that have an issue have a problem with us paying for those weapons before we send them, which is very popular among a lot of conservative governments worldwide. Actually, is how much pressure is being put on taxpayers for.
There's one final thing I can say to add on to that, where you're right, where things are slowly changing, and Donald Trump is being the first to start something brand new, or that's showing that resentment that's going on. When it comes to the United States mentality, there's something that they've always, since before World War II and everything, we've always been known as being an isolation state, an isolationist nation. But then when it comes to something that now it could be in the sense that it could come after, but if there's comes a sense where all of a sudden, like whether it's a 9/11 or whether it's a attack on Pearl Harbor or whatever the third case, as soon as you touch a United States soil in some sort of way, whether it's directly or indirectly for that matter, and we could see something like that. I don't know the prediction, but then you would see in all of a sudden joint effort where they realize that United States needs to be involved. This is the most involved we've seen the United States right now. And it could be true that we're going to have some arguments to like not support Ukraine so much. But at the same time, once you bring United States in, the whole culture mentality goes into the same time into the war effort. But we'll see how it goes from there. But mostly we like to be an isolationist until that time comes. All right.
Okay, I want to add 2 points. The first one is to continue on this topic about American politics and isolationism and so on. I think a big factor to what direction the United States will go in the next election and what policies will drive it depends on the outcome of this war. If Ukraine ends up suffering a huge defeat, then there will be a lot less support for American interventionism if it ends up that when they are so involved in this war, and then all this money and all of this effort and so on is put into something like this, and then it fails, that will be a humiliation for the United States. While if they succeed and manage to push back Russia, then the policy will definitely drive towards more interventionism as they see that they succeed in getting their interest across the globe and are still this hegemon that controls the foreign policy and the peace in the world and so on. And then back to the original question of how the OPEC cuts affects the situation in Europe. It actually helps the situation in Europe. And the way it does is that the OPEC countries actually announced that they would increase the price of their oil to the United States and decrease it to Europe while keeping it the same for the rest of the countries. And this is a very clear message to Europe that this is not against them. They want to supply them as they have been supplying them. It is against the United States. The United States are self-sufficient in oil, which is why there's this drive for isolationism, because they don't actually need any natural resources from abroad. They are self-sufficient. What they're doing is that they're actually selling oil to Europe, and then the OPEC countries can sell it to Europe because the United States is selling it to them, and then the United States buys from OPEC countries from this lower price because the United States is a reliable source of oil for Europe, and then the United States buys it cheap from the Middle East. So what this does is that the United States will not be able to buy as much as they have been from the Middle East, which will negate this self-sufficiency because they are selling to Europe. So essentially what the Middle East is trying to do, or the OPEC countries are trying to do with this cut in production, is to make the European countries buy from them instead of the United States. So that's the effect it has. So it's positive for Europe because they get it cheaper, and it's bad for the United States because they cannot be selling it, so they lose money.
And if I can add to you, Abunion and the DPA, and then when we have other questions, like actually I think that the forecast about the economy of not only Europe but all the world, it's minimum 1 semester of recession. So technically Germany will be in recession for sure next year. So with a sure recession, all the prices of oil and gas, Ian can correct me, but oil is already going down in Europe. So the OPEC made this move only also decreasing the oil production, but it was already decreased because there is no answer. So less answer, so the prices are going down. Actually, in Italy, the prices were at the beginning of the war over €2 for a liter. Now it's 1.7 for diesel. And the strange thing that it's something that we learned about the war is that in Italy, for example, we have very, very few diesel refinery. We were importing diesel, and we have like gasoline, but in Italy it's called benzene. And every time in the last 30 years, diesel was cheaper than gasoline. Now it's the opposite. So diesel that normally was used for like let's say to save money or whatever, it's more expensive than gasoline, than benzene in Italy. And it's something that is changing also a little bit of the balance in the economy. The industries are trying to change their priority for the next year, especially the energivore, like for example glass production, metal production, or whatever. They are still not planning any production for the next year because we don't know what will do the new government. Like Germany that put 200 billion euro on the plate to reduce the cost of the energy. I think that Italy will do the same, probably with between 50 and 80 billions. But we have to do it in depth. Germany have like, let's say, cash to spend. So questions.
The only thing I would add to that, Stefano, is that generally a price drop in oil or gas isn't necessarily a good thing. It could be a sign that Europe is already entering into a deep recession. It could, like, it's often, I mean, obviously cheaper gas and cheaper oil will be a good thing, but a lot of these industries that need cheap gas and oil to keep functioning, it might be the case that they've already shut their doors or stop producing or whatever, and now there's less demand for that oil and gas, and it could be going down. And not saying that's what happened, but it's one possibility. So
to give you a number that was made by the Association of Industries in Italy, they said that if the government will not do nothing about the price cost in the next 3 months, we will have at minimum 100,000 industries or companies that will close. So it's not 100, 1,000, it's 100,000. So I think that everybody knows that the war, it's not good for nobody to go over.
But along that way, like, imagine even if they do manage to do something about those prices, like there's so many, like 100,000, that's a huge number of businesses, and there's so many of them that are probably right on the edge of their finances that can't wait 3 months. They can't wait a week. Like there's definitely businesses in the UK that I've seen that are already closing, and there's probably some more closing than opening in Italy right now, if that's the truth.
And I think personally that we are really actually economically in a recession from 2020. It was like covered by the extra funds for COVID or whatever, but the companies are already passing like 2 years that was disaster. For example, the tourism this year was at the peak from 2019, but 2020 and 2021 was disaster. So imagine like to have like one big sector, for example, for Southern Europe, that it's about 15%, 17% of the GDP, that it was closed for 1 year and a half. So one question, and also DPA if you want, but it's like, does anybody believe that the dollar will remain a world reserve currency in 2032? I don't know why 2032. And connected to this one, what are the conditions for the collapse of the dollar as global reserve currency? How realistic is it? It is. And what kind of damage should we expect on the world if it ever happen?
Okay.
Okay.
Want to go first?
DPA first, because you didn't talk before. So
I don't. okay, so we have to put into perspective, what do we mean by not becoming the reserve currency of the world? So currently, most of the global trade is by US dollars. So is it, if less than 80% is a collapse of the reserve currency, or is it 50% is collapse of the reserve currency? So it could be like, only 50% of the world of the global trade is still using US dollars, but it will still be the global reserve currency, because any other currencies will still not make up to 50%. You'll be significantly lesser. So at max, you got like 15%. Maybe 15% of the world is using rubles because they are buying Russian oil and gas and food. So the US dollar will still be the reserve currency for as long as we can see, because as long as US continue to be the big boss or the big brother of the free world or the international community, then it will continue to be the reserve currency of the world. And from what we can tell, it's still going to be that case for some time, unless there is a concerted effort to by the entire OPEC plus China plus Russia to suddenly all decide to use another currency, just one currency, and then we might see a major problem, because most of the commercial trading, the goods, is all made in China. So if China say no, if you want to buy China goods, you must use a certain currency. Let's say Singapore dollars. Okay, suddenly everyone want to buy Singapore dollars. Okay, only use Singapore dollars. We only accept Singapore dollars. Then after that, oil and gas, all of OPEC say we only trade in Singapore dollars. Then you're gonna have a big problem. Then suddenly no one want to use US dollars, because there's no more reasons to use US dollars in the global market. And that's the danger of the Brics countries, because the Brics countries have the capability to push this. But tentatively, I don't think that will be the case just yet, because in the Middle East, in terms of OPEC countries, they cannot do without US weaponry just yet, because they cannot fully trust Russia as well, and there's no point having everyone have the same weapons. So people like Saudi Arabia, or certain other countries, you will still want US weaponry, and for that, you still have to stick to US dollars. So, and most of this Western or international community, we are all coastal countries. We all trade by the sea, and most of us will be using US dollars. So in terms of trade, it's going to be still mostly US dollars. Unless something drastic happen. Like America go into civil war, for example. Let's say the political situation in USA continue to degrade. Biden say something stupid, Trump do something stupid, then suddenly the civil war break out in USA. Then yes, we will start to see a quite fast collapse of the US dollars, because no one wants US dollar anymore, because US will be in war. No one will be buying anything from the United States. Then nobody can get US dollars, so it's kind of stupid to continue to trade in US dollars. So in that kind of situation, I think that will be the case. And this chart is quite scary. It looks like a World War III is going to come soon.
Ian is tricking me with sharing.
I would just say that the question was hilarious, because as far as I'm concerned, in 2016 a gorilla died in a Cincinnati zoo, and no one's been able to predict what's going to happen 3 months in advance. So trying to predict that whether the US or the dollar.
Sorry. Ian, sorry, but someone is coming in delay. But
hey, history legends! Welcome to the chat.
Welcome, Alex.
Nice to meet you, my man.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you.
But yeah,
So,
trying to predict in 2032, 10 years in advance from now, like whether it's going to be the reserve currency or not, I don't think there's. I mean, that's a very difficult task there. I do think that, Wyatt has some good points, and it's smart if you were going to bet on one of these currencies, that the dollar is probably the best bet. The U.S. Economy is the most stable worldwide. The U.S. Geographically is always going to be a powerhouse. I mean, we have excellent security here. We have excellent crop yield. We have excellent production capacity, if not in America, in the combined NAFTA countries, America, Mexico, and Canada. So economically, it's a good part of the world to bet on. But I would say that 10-year, you can never give any kind of definite prediction 10 years into the future.
Web Union, go.
There we go. Okay. Adding to the 2 points you've both made. First, Wyatt, you mentioned this about one drastic thing happening. And Ian, you mentioned this about predicting the future. So about predicting the future, I agree it is impossible to predict the future. You don't even know what happens tomorrow. If we asked anyone in here yesterday, will tomorrow Russia launch a large air campaign over Ukraine, destroying all the energy grid? Who would say yes? So yeah, but there are things that you can guess based on, or you can make an estimate, or you can say, for example, the Brics countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have announced earlier, I think this summer, that they will create their own reserve currency in sharing in between them. And then we have countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Mexico, Argentina, all talking about interest in joining BRICS. So having these 10 or so countries sharing one reserve currency will definitely have a huge impact on the use of the dollar as a reserve currency globally. Also, the fact that the United States keeps sanctioning a lot of countries. They have sanctioned Russia, they have sanctioned Iran, and they've sanctioned many other countries, while BRICS have not sanctioned anyone. So using the BRICS reserve currency would allow any country to trade with any country, while using the US dollar has a lot of limitations because of the sanctions. So we will see the BRICS reserve currency having a huge impact on the global use of the US dollar. As you mentioned, the United States dollar may fall to 70%, or maybe even in a drastic rate, 50%. And BRICS will not even break this 50%. However, it will have a huge impact in the sense that the United States dollar will not be the sole standing currency in the world as it has been the past 100 years. So it will not be the definitive global reserve currency, but it will still be the strongest player in the game.
Thank you, Wib. Alex? So welcome back to us.
Yeah,
So
I don't
we
think he
were
saw the
waiting you
question.
so much.
I didn't see the question.
Now the question
Could
was
I go quickly
about,
before him? Or
Yeah,
okay,
go,
yes, for sure.
Oh, what's the question? That way I can think of it, and then.
Now the question was about if dollar could be like the let's say the trade currency in let's say 10 years, and what is like in the actual situation that can collapse the petrodollar trade system.
Okay.
Them the history if you want.
Well, first and foremost, DPA said it straight that that in the next 10 years it's not going to fall. The United States dollar will still be the world reserve currency. Now, in terms of its value comparing to others, there's already other competing currencies up. You have the Chinese yuan that is still building up its market share, that is becoming more influent. That its journey is not to become the top right now. The Chinese yuan is just trying to build more influence outside. They are expansionists in their own way, whether that should be Africa, Sri Lanka, and everything. So they are going to that will be able to impose more influence from their currency as well. But they're not even the second most valuable currency. That would be the EU, which is obviously falling right now due to this entire situation in Europe. But if we look back at what happened with the United States, when the United States became the largest economy in the world in 1890, but it did not get its become the world currency. The US dollar did not become the reserve currency until 1944 because of the two world wars, and because there was so much in debt between the United Kingdom with its gold and with Germany. They all had to pay reparations, but they needed loans because of the hyperinflation. So who did they borrow from? They borrowed from the United States. And it all starts to that. It all starts there. The key word is borrow. When you start to see another country starting to borrow, another world power starting to borrow from another, that's when things slowly start to change. Now, before I get into the now, then we had where the US dollar got off the gold reserve back in 1971 when President Nixon, back when it's loaning. So now the US dollar was just backed by this. We like to say a quote here in Florida when that the United States currency is backed by aircraft carriers and nukes, while crypto, for example, is backed by geeks and nerds. And by the way, if you guys didn't know, I work full time as a crypto analyst, so this is a lot of fun for me. Before geopolitics, I'm slowly rolling over. Now, when it comes to now, like Weeb Union said and everything, we don't know when the US dollar will fall off and when's the next US reserve currency. But judging by history, the flow goes like this. It starts with the borrowing, where the United States is starting to borrow from other nations, whether that be China or whether that be Japan and everything. That's why you're seeing Japan buying a lot of bonds, U.S. bonds, because then they can also just lend them out again at the same time, or that's where they're putting all of their value right now. We'll see if it's a good investment for them as the years go on. Japan has their own situation, mix and everything, but it starts with the borrowing. And then, like you're starting to see challenges, whether that be crypto as one, which is not going to have really good influence in the short term, but could have a big influence in the long term, 10 years plus, 20 years plus, because it's still on the gray line of being legal, borderline legal and illegal with a lot of nations. It doesn't serve nations that well, but it should be something that, as a common man, they could believe in it while government currencies and fiat is backed by the government. This is kind of a scapegoat in that sense. That is the crypto sense. We still have the upcoming, the Brics, the Chinese yuan, the EU that is still gaining more power as time goes on. And that will still grow and take more market share and reserve and still, yeah, I think that's the gist of it when it comes to the US currency. Bottom line, the US dollar will stay on the reserve until, I will say my prediction will be until the next world war. If that case ever does come, whether it's 50 years or 100 years from now, then that will be the new standard of the world order with its new currency.
Or maybe later this month.
Things happen so quick. Ask me the same question next month. I have a different answer.
We don't give me bad luck. I need to be in 15 days in Tokyo. There is already Kim Jong-un that's sending missile through my head. So
I'm going in 20 days to South Korea, and that's not a fun time after the news that just happened last week.
Don't worry, North Korea will be keeping quiet the entire World War III. Trust me.
Okay.
It's their time to become the number one country in the world, so they will just keep quiet.
By the way, Wyatt, remember to invite me to your World War III stream when it goes live.
Yeah, me too.
I have an unlimited World War III
do it on TikTok
schedule. That is like, you will never go live. No, I just schedule it and I just keep postponing. So, I just thought that it was funny.
So Alex, your turn. But before I take your stand, don't call counteroffensive. So we are calling about offensive. So we are watching your video particularly. Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add Alex this one. If that DPA said it was interesting. Also, one comment of Warslaw, one of the Russian economists, is taking for 20 years about war division to economical zones, free force zones with their own reserve currencies.
Well, it was very interesting to listen to you guys talk about the US dollar. But one thing that I thought about during this war in Ukraine is that there's a lot of people that have a lot of interest in reducing the influence of the euro. A lot of people. So I think the US dollar might have been threatened by the euro in a way. And not just the US, but a lot of countries thought the euro might have been a bit too powerful. And they wanted to reshuffle the cards quickly. That's one thing I see, because when you see at the situation in Europe, the Europeans don't benefit from it. Like if we look at it from a very cold perspective, Like, if you're not part of it, you just look from above. There's some countries that benefit from this chaos right now. And that's it. I think the EU in itself is losing its industry, losing its energy. So the value, if they don't produce anything, the value of the money decreases. If they lose their industry, the value decreases. So the US is safer. Like, I think what happened in Europe now gave the US a lot of time to plan its economy in the future.
Everybody is just nodding.
No, I kind of agree with that, Alex. It's honestly, I mean, it's been written about a lot, but the U.S. was very unhappy about the creation of the euro to begin with. The way that the U.S. saw it was, like, we helped you rebuild, we helped you bail out of, like, World War II, and ever since then we've been protecting you and doing your security policy for you. No, none of them, contribute to NATO or anything. And not only that, but the European economy is a direct competitor to the American economy. Like, you're looking at the same technical skills. They make a lot of the same things, like whether it be high-tech manufacturing or design work. It's, there's really the main trade that goes back and forth between the US and the EU is like niche products, or like French wine and or Italian cheese, or, like, things that, like, only come from certain places of the world. Everything else, like, you look at, like, aircraft parts or aircraft themselves, cars. I mean, like, European cars have to be built in America to be sold in America. Like, there's a big reason for that. So yeah, the US was never happy about the creation of the euro to begin with. So as some people might touch on, like, what you're saying is a little bit conspiratorial, which it might it might not be, like, the direct intention of the US to hurt the euro, but there's certainly some people in the US with some influence that are sitting back saying, thank God, it turned out this way. But that's all I got to add on to that.
It's more like a oops. Oh no.
Or it's
Oh,
just
no,
one of the
the
many,
Nord
many
Stream.
reasons. One of the many reasons why US is doing all this. And it's, I'm just adding on to that. It's not just the creation of a euro. If you look at EU, they have been trying very hard not to push the idea of a European army. No, they are trying to get away from the influence of United States. So it's not exactly like so innocent, the European the euros. There is certain reasons. There is, of course, trading reasons, very convenient. You don't have to care about currency differences. But as a whole, they do have their own reasoning why they are doing all these things. Like to establish a European army when you already have NATO is one of those very weird kind of circumstances where a lot of people don't really understand, which is why the European army don't take off, because everyone is like, then what's the point of NATO? So no, I'm quite sure on the United States side, especially within the government, the deep states, the so-called the deep state, where the government workers, the analysts for the government is probably definitely looking at this, and no, it's not a very good idea to let Europe to be a bit so strong. And that's why I say it could be many reasons why they are trying to encourage Ukraine to continue this war, because it helps to push Europe down to a level where they can control. And the fact is that they literally have Europe on the leash, as far as I can tell. Europe is kind of stuck. In terms of foreign policies, they can't really make decisions. You see, Germany is just like struggling to. Don't even know what the hell they are doing. Is that they are just not doing the things that for their own citizens. They're just going along very reluctantly with whatever EU is pushing or United States is pushing. But you can tell from the way they talk, they're just not interested to continue the war. They don't want to help Ukraine. They just want that stupid Nord Stream 2 gas, but they cannot get it, and then it got blown up. It's like they're so frustrated, but they cannot do anything. So, and surprisingly, Germany was the EU's leader. We had always seen Germany as the leader of the EU, and the leader of the EU is so weak at this moment. So, that's why, there are certain weight to what history legend has said. And if I am USA, that will be what I would do. Just squish you into.
And also it was to separate, because we see that there was this thing that was forming in the background. It was sort of a Eurasian alliance with Germany, Russia, and China. And if we ignore this from the current events, we can't understand. Basically, if we look at this Eurasian alliance, it would be German technology, Russian resources, and Chinese factories and industrial output. It's literally unbeatable. Like, they have continental, you don't need to go through the ocean. And we know that what makes the US so strong, like then history said, it's aircraft carriers, it's the Navy. And it's the same that made the British Empire so powerful, it's the Navy. But if you don't need the oceans, this alliance would be very strong. And they didn't like that Russia had such an influence in German politics. So I think they pulled the plug, literally, in Germany, to separate them forcefully.
I'm getting hardcore 1984 vibes from this discussion, along with like the 4 separate regions of the world. It's like today, East Asia is in an alliance with Eurasia, and we're at war with Oceania. Tomorrow, we're in an alliance with Oceania, and we're at war with East Asia.
Conflict of nations.
And it sounds a lot like Axis Power 2.0. Just that this time Germany chose better allies. Instead of Japan, they chose something like China, which is like much more powerful. And then instead of Italy, which is like pretty useless in World War II, they chose Russia. Something like that. So Germany is.
Stefano is not smiling.
Axis power.
Stefano is not smiling. I'm just saying this.
Okay, I want to add something to this conversation, and that is about a huge issue that not a lot of people actually know about Germany, and that is someone mentioned that 20% of the German car industry has moved out of Germany, and that is just the beginning. And I completely agree with that statement. You see, the dark side of the European Union for Germany is that with free passage and all of this stuff with that the European Union encompasses, there's also the fact that German companies have decided, wait, if we build industries here in Germany, we have to pay German wages and we have to do this and that. But they can technically just go to Hungary or Romania, where labor is much cheaper, build industries there. They still own everything. So Hungary and Romania doesn't get richer. They just get their wages, which gives them a little boost. But they still own all of these things. So they build them cheaply in the European Union, ship them back to Germany without any extra taxes, and then they just sell them in Germany or wherever they want to export them to. So they are getting cheap labor within the European Union by transferring their industry from Germany to other countries in Eastern Europe that have lower wages.
This is something you see very often in history, in every market, in every sense of it. Like with the United States being in direct competition with Japan, where all of a sudden you had automotive starting to move away from the the Rust Belts. All of a sudden, where a lot of manufacturing happened throughout the first half of the 1900s, all of a sudden it started to move into Japan until 1989, and then it started to go into South Korea, where they can start to manufacture a lot of things. And it's the same thing that's actually happening. I mean, it's the same thing happening in Europe right now, where, like you said, where Germany used to be everything was built in Germany. It's actually surprised me, but at the same time, it doesn't surprise me that you say that it's going over to the east. Here in Denmark, we're seeing a lot of our tech, IT, and everything is being outsourced all through Poland as well. And it's everything that ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Eastern Bloc that is finally getting integrated with its infrastructure, that's slowly being integrated back into the European Union to the West, whether it's with the financial district or whether it's with every single industry. They're able to do it a lot cheaper because it's developing. It's the same thing with China right now. Not to go straight across, but you're seeing that China's now they used to have a very low margin, but now it's becoming more expensive for their own citizens to do it. So it's slowly getting pushed out to other parts of the region, and then at some point, eventually, maybe within this decade, it'll start to be a Vietnam that'll start to take some of the jobs. But that is still in prediction state at the moment. But yeah,
About China, Ian, we need to do a stream. You know that we need to do it, but we need to plan it.
The
Remember,
industries, yeah, you're actually onto something there, and that is actually already happening, and it's less so like factories are being closed down in China, but like the newest factories that are being developed, they're actually going to Vietnam and Indonesia, Malaysia, and
I
some of
was
these
right.
places.
I was just guessing.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know.
but you're onto something with or Weebs is onto something with German industry moving into eastern parts of Europe. This was actually originally, like, I mean, going back like over the last 2 decades, like forget like the whole war thing going on in Ukraine, there has been a battle for influence in Ukraine between Germany and Russia, and at the same time, like where there's kind of this resources alliance going on, right, where Russia gives Germany its raw resources and they convert that into product, where Germany has been looking and eyeballing these opportunities to transfer their industry to Hungary, Romania, Poland, and the biggest one, the one that they've been wanting to move the industry to the most, and one country that they've done a lot of investment in, is actually Ukraine. Of all those countries, Ukraine is the poorest. That means the people work for the cheapest, and that means the most profitable for German industry. So Germany has had some kind of interest in Ukraine for quite a bit of time, but the interest, I mean, and the bit of time we're talking here is 100 years essentially. You know, like this was the interest that Germany had in Ukraine during World War II and World War I. You know, when they tried to annex those territories. So, you know, they wanted to keep this resource alliance with Russia, but they wanted to tie in Ukraine to the situation and have like a big friendly kumbaya where Russia would send the resources, Ukraine would send the labor, and then Germany would make all the money. But as you can see, it didn't. It definitely did not work out that way. Which
Yeah,
I'm sure
and
Germany
actually,
doesn't really see the situation anywhere near the same now.
so
Yeah,
actually,
and
it is true, because when I was researching about stuff about the Ukraine war, so what happened is that there is actually a labor shortage in Poland because of the war, because so apparently, which I never thought about it until I saw the information, was that there is actually a lot of migrant workers from Ukraine going to Poland to work in the low wage jobs like construction jobs, factory lines, and this is something that it just I didn't think of it, because this is a very common thing, where the poorer countries, the citizens will go to the slightly richer country to work. And the funny thing is that the Polish is actually working for German companies, and then but the Polish are using the Ukrainian citizens to do the jobs that they themselves don't want to do. So yeah, so this is something that is already happening. It's just that maybe for Germany wise, they just wanted even cheaper workers because they already have Polish, the Polish workers. Then it's like, oh, who is cheaper than the Polish, the neighbors?
But Alex, DPA, sorry, I will put it to question about like the war that we didn't watch before from the beginning. So Alex, if you can, wait 1 sec. So okay, what's the counter argument that winter won't make any difference but the mobilization? Felipe Pires, you know him, so.
Okay, it's weirdly written. The question.
And this one, it's war in Ukraine seem to think that the Kherson bridge had collapsed. It's a matter of time. Do the rest of you agree? First, I have to
What's
say
the first
that
question? I missed it.
Yeah, the first question was weird.
First question was, what's the counter argument that the winter won't make any difference but the mobilization?
So there's double negative. So what's the argument that winter will make a difference? I don't know.
I think the question here is, what is the counter argument that winter won't make any difference? So there's no difference in the winter other than mobilization. Is mobilization the only difference, or will there be other differences? That's how I understand it.
Okay.
And the second one was about let's say the prediction of war in Ukraine, of the bridge collapse. It's just a matter of time. I have to say that war in Ukraine was invited, and but also military summary. I hope that they will come in the next streams. Military summary was sick, and so I think I hope that it will be healthy soon, and also war in Ukraine we will wait for the next stream. So
Okay.
Alex,
So,
Web Union,
Can I
it's up to you.
quickly continue?
Go ahead,
And the
go
last
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Web, if you return, and then we move on. Okay.
So quickly, as Wyatt was saying, that German take Poles and Poland takes Ukrainians. It is actually a very long circle of life within the European Union, that all countries take these migrant workers from poorer countries, and then eventually it adds up to one country having labor shortages, which ended up being Ukraine because they had the cheapest labor in the whole area. So essentially what we're seeing is that, as Ian knows very well, I know you do because we listen to the same guys, but essentially what's it called, the demographics of the European countries in general is very horrible, because all European countries have aging populations, and we are facing labor shortages in all of these countries, which is actually very horrible, because there's not enough young people kids being born, and young people is decreasing while older people is increasing. We are the projections for Denmark is that we currently have about 1 million people above the age of 60, and in 30 years it will be 1.5 million. So that's a 50% increase in 30 years, while the birth rate is stable around 1.7, which is a yearly decrease of 4%, or was it 0, somewhere around there, of how many kids are being born. So we're in a very bad situation where there's less and less young people and more old people that need to be taken care of. And then we're just fixing that situation by taking in migrant workers. But with the war in the war in Ukraine, this sets a stop to this whole thing, because Poland doesn't receive Ukrainian workers, then they call back workers from Germany, or they end up in a situation where they don't have workers, and so on. And then it all collapses the whole working environment in the European Union. So that's to finish up the older question. Now we can go up to the new question, and you said history legends.
Well, the Kherson bridgehead, I mean, people said it would imminently collapse already 2 months ago. So honestly, at this point, I don't know. I don't know what he said, but it's so hard to predict. Like, most of these offensive, we didn't know. Like, when Ukraine attacked, we didn't know that it would happen. But right now, the bridgehead seems to hold, and with the poor weather coming every day, it's going to be even more complicated. Because one thing why the weather is important that a lot of analysts miss is that the Ukraine army uses a lot of wheeled vehicles, so they don't have trucks. So a lot of pickup trucks, Humvees, to do these type of blitzkrieg inside Russian lines. The Russians don't have enough troops to defend, so Ukrainians just send the troops in with wheeled vehicles. Now, this is great in summer, but once there's mud, the wheels get stuck, so you can't advance. So this is where I think that the weather will make a difference, and also that mobilization makes a difference for Russia, and that now is the last moment that Ukraine can attack, if anything. What do you guys think?
I just find it more funny is that I don't know whose bridgehead is he referring to. Is it the Russian bridgehead or the Ukrainian bridgehead? Was like, which bridgehead? So because both sides is like, they seem to have certain bridgehead. It's like, the Russians have the bridgehead at Kherson, off Nova Kakhovka. Then you have the Ukrainians off the Inhulas River. So I don't know which bridgehead we are referring to. But no, so yeah, it will collapse. The bridgehead will collapse. I just can tell you which
one bridgehead will collapse.
Yeah, one of them will collapse.
So I got something to add here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my map here. That way we can look at it. The way that I see this situation, and this line right here is outlining where the Russian lines used to be. This territory that Russia gave up is some of the most lightly populated territory basically in the entire country of Ukraine. Like there's real, like, these towns that you're seeing here on the map are virtually the only towns in this entire area, and none of them really have like anywhere near like 1,000 people in them. Like they're very, very sparsely populated towns. And the way that I see this situation is that based on the fact that once Ukraine broke through this line and Russia retreated to the current line that they're sitting at now, which is here, there hasn't been any gains made by the Ukrainian side. And I'm hypothesizing that the Russian side already had a pre-positioned defensive line built in this area. Just looking at it geographically, this is the best spot in terms of like there's a pretty even distribution across the entire line as far as like distance to the supply points go. So anywhere you take it, like you're looking at about like the same distance to supply points. This is like the I guess you could say like the maximum perimeter that the Russian side can hold here and like keep the line stable. And there's another bit of information that's come out from some pro-Ukrainian channels as well in the last few days, and they're saying that the Russian side is constructing yet another defensive line as a contingency plan to the south of Novorossiysk, still significantly to the north of Berislav and the Novokakhovka conglomeration. So I don't think necessarily that the Russian side is in a bad position here in Kherson. If anything, they've reduced the length of their front line by some like 50 to 80 kilometers. So that means more troops per kilometer of front should be like an easier defense. Now, obviously, if the Russian side is taking much heavier casualties than we've seen evidence of, then that would be different. But at this point, it seems like they're having, I mean, the supply situation isn't as good as it could be because these bridges are out, but they do operate pontoon bridges and ferries all along this section of the river here. I think the Russian side could easily hold on to the Kherson bridgehead. That's just my personal opinion. But
that I have about this, and it's so hard to have an answer, but since the start, like the official start, so in late August until now, how many casualties did both sides suffer in Kherson? This is a very important thing, because if we don't know if we don't know the casualties that both sides have suffered, it's very hard for us to analyze. Imagine that Ukrainians suffer massive casualties. At the end of the day, I'm like, how many casualties is that bridgehead worth? Same thing for the Russians. Like, what is the casualties that both sides suffer, both in manpower and in vehicles? It's very hard for us. No side wants to give that information out because it would be bad. But at the end of the day, I really want to know, because it would make our job much easier. This is what a lot of people say. They predictions. Yeah, it's very hard to do a prediction when you don't even have the full data.
The Ministry and Web Union wanted to talk.
Yeah, just to make a quick thing, that's a very good statement. The answer is I don't have the answer to that. The end. No, you don't. It's that is it does make sense. When it comes to a push like that, you want to know what it is, because the Russian side will not share it either. The Ukrainians will definitely not share their losses. The Russians don't want to share it because they don't want to share that information to their own society, because that would rile up their own people, since they're so close culturally and ethnically. It's supposed to be a special operation, not a total war, and it doesn't look good. We don't have those answers, what it looks like. Now, what we do know about a push, and I'm sure the military experts would agree or even go further with this, that when you do a push, you need to have like a manpower ratio of like 3-1, because you're going to lose more when you do a push. And the the only way that, which is surprisingly, that we were able to see the way Ukraine was able to do these successful counteroffensives and do these pushes is because they were able to drag the logistics from their direct precision of HIMARS strikes, and also be able to be successful by the rotation, by making them go to the Kherson region rather than to the Kharkiv, where there are more recruits. Now, Kherson region has the most advanced, most veterans, and so they're not going to want to budge. To answer the question that was previous about how does this winter, what was the exact question? How does winter change it, or
how the
change the
winter
lines?
gives the advantage or changes the situation?
The counter argument to winter and mobilization.
We're going to see if it actually can, what people are dreaming, if this could be a winter war, like the way Finland was able to hold off Russia. But this is the time where we're going to see it, where we're all eyes. This is going to be a brand new war. It's we've never seen winter. We've seen the coming out of winter from spring, and now this is going to be a whole new thing the next 5-6 months. I'm losing my chain of thought right now. Okay. I think, okay, when it comes to sustainability, I think the Russians really want to push for winter because it'll slow down the Ukrainian war machine movement to move forward. But it also means that, will they have enough sustainability in terms of food and resources? I'm seeing a lot of things roll around, and I only take it with a grain of salt, of where the Russian units don't even have enough socks, where they're using cloth to start wrapping their feet and everything. Are they not prepared for winter in another country? As that seems to be the take at this case, and that's where I rest my case.
Yeah, that's probably propaganda or misinformation. It's impossible that the Russians do not know what is winter, because Russia is probably much colder than Ukraine. So no. Second is, my opinion is that the winter is not going to make much difference to both sides, because they are both Russians in a way. They're both Russians. They're both Ukrainians, whatever, to be.
You got a lot of hate coming your way for saying that.
So,
but you see, both they are the same type of people. They are both Slavic people.
Slavs,
they both, very used. They are very used to winter kind of environment. It's not like you have the French going 2,000 kilometers eastward and then go into a totally different environment and they don't know how to fight. It's not the kind of situation. Just like the Germans, when the Germans reached Russia, they were like, "What the hell is this place?" Then it's like they are wearing Hugo Boss Prada clothes to go and fight war kind of situation. It's not that kind of case. Both sides is going to be pretty all right with the weather. So which means the mobilization is going to make a difference. And the other thing about the just now history legends was saying how much soldiers do you want to sacrifice, does it to worth capturing all those grounds? If you ask the Ukrainians, they will just say yes. No, how many soldiers is it worth? No, yes. No, because the tactic is just Zerg rush. If you play StarCraft, it's just Zerg rush. They just rush as many troops as possible, just to capture as much ground as possible, and that's the tactic as far as I can tell. So, yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about the winter, and I want to talk about the Kherson thing. Okay, so I will present my thing here. Okay, here. So I have made an analysis on my channel where I look at the situation in Kherson and the actual defensive lines by the Russian side, because they are on the defensive here very clearly. And what we see is that they generally do these moves where they set up multiple defensive lines, where they try to take advantage of these open areas. Where we look at the satellite image, there's no positions where anyone can hide here, and it's all open fields, which is why the Ukrainian offensive in Kherson is actually not going as well as they planned. Whenever they try to gather a large grouping of forces, we see Russian Air Force and Russian artillery striking them before they can make a move. So they lose a lot of their momentum before it actually starts with their push. And they're always ready to pull back from these areas because they're all open fields. It's easy for them to pull back. They've prepared their retreat route and done everything, and then they have their second line of defense they can pull back to. and just set up here, and then they will be fighting again. So that's what we have been seeing in Kherson. And why it went drastically different in Kharkiv compared to what we see in Kherson is because we see that there are these large forests right next to the front line where the front line was when they engaged in their offensive in Kharkiv. And that is that the reports actually said that the Ukrainians actually gathered all their forces and camouflaged them in the forests in the area to prevent the Russians from finding them with drones and satellite images. They cannot do that in Kherson, which is why we are seeing the Russians try and prevent any groupings of forces. They had some success here next to Bilohirka and Davidivbrit, where they actually pushed into at the start, because we see that there are actually some forests here. But other than that, this is all completely open area, and that is why we're seeing the Ukrainians having much more trouble in Kherson compared to Kharkiv. As for the winter, that is in addition to what we've just seen, that the leaves fall here in October. In a month's time, there will be no leaves in all of Ukraine. So all this strategy of camouflaging their forces in the forests really benefits the defender. So whoever is on the defense will be in trouble in the winter. And with the partial mobilization adding 300,000 troops to Ukraine from the Russian side, it gives them a lot more open opportunities to conduct offensives again, similar to what we saw at the start of the war. If the Ukrainians have this disadvantage where they cannot set up ambushes and defensive positions in these areas, it makes it very difficult for them to defend. There's a YouTube channel called Willie Beats Cancer. He is a guy from Australia who actually traveled to Ukraine because he got cancer, and he thought, if I'm going to die, then I want to do this first. So he went around Ukraine, traveled around. He went to the front line. It was in Pisky when it was being shelled at, and he interviewed foreign volunteers as well as Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Ukraine, asking them about their experiences and so on. He did a very recent interview, I think it was uploaded 2 days or so ago, where essentially there was this American soldier who went to Ukraine, American former soldier, is a veteran, who went to Ukraine to fight. And he ended up fighting in the Azov regiment around Zaporizhia. And once Mariupol originally was encircled, he was actually sent on a team to help break this encirclement and help the Azov soldiers encircled in Mariupol. And he talked about his experiences here. He said that they intercepted some Russian communications, and they had to the Russians were waiting for reinforcements, so they wanted to impersonate these reinforcements and ambush them. But in the end, this interception of communications was a trap, and they weren't waiting for reinforcements. So when they came, there was actually fighting happening, and the Russians actually ambushed them. They were hiding in the forests, and once they arrived, they would use their Ka-52 helicopters. I think that's what they're called. Their attack helicopters. And they would ambush them, and they were attacking from all sides, and they were always hitting the last tank in the column to prevent any retreat. So from his own words, he was fighting in Ukraine on the Ukrainian side. From his own words, he said that of the 200 to 1,000 soldiers who were in his regiment, it was completely annihilated. Only him and the commander were alive. They were hiding in the trench under dead bodies. And they said that the Russians in that area had barely any casualties. And the only reason they survived was because of the leaves on the forest that allowed them to hide from the helicopter. So from his experience, if that was in winter, he would be dead. And so was everyone else in that situation.
From what you're telling me, this is very interesting because nobody talks about this random ambush. Nobody talks about it. How many times, how many similar ambushes happened without anyone talking about it? Even the Russians don't talk about it. So,
because this is all drowning in the what's it called, the I don't remember, I forgot the word, but the bureaucracy. There's a lot of paperwork. There's actually now from the opposite side a Russian soldier, a Russian officer actually. He talked about his daily life in Ukraine. He's an officer commanding some troops in Kherson actually. He says he wakes up at 6 a.m. He files some reports. He gives orders to his soldiers. Then he goes on to a meeting an hour and a half drive away. He goes there, attends the meeting, and then he goes over to a different meeting, and then he returns back, listens to the report from his soldiers, and then he goes to sleep. He wakes up and repeats. The officer commanding the soldiers has not seen the front line, does not see how they operate, and all of that stuff. He's constantly in meetings and doing reports. How can they do an effective offensive or even an effective defensive if all they're doing 24/7 is sleeping and doing reports and meetings? So Russia is constantly in this loop of paperwork when they are fighting a war, while the Ukrainians are very decentralized due to the NATO training and the NATO doctrine, allowing them to operate without all of this bureaucracy.
But this is why you're right, and this is why I think for the winter, what the Russians are planning is urban warfare. I think urban warfare is the Russians are pretty good at it, and we've seen that whether in Bakhmut or anywhere they fought for cities relatively. It's because it's easy. You take one block after another, and paperwork armies do well. You don't have to maneuver. So this is why I think we could see. This is why they keep attacking where their cities. They don't even try to maneuver because their army is not capable of doing that. But if they have more manpower, their attacks might be better. It's just that they'll do frontal assaults.
Mm-hmm. Also, a quick note to Damned History, because he was talking about the advantage when you have to attack. I took a lot of notes when I read The Art of War, and the Art of War, Sun Tzu, he says 10-1 if you want to surround the enemy, 5-1 if you want to attack. If you have 2-1 advantage, you split your army into two, so that you cover greater ground. If equally matched, you can offer battle. If you are lower, then you run away. And that's what the Russians are doing. They are outnumbered, so they run away.
Yeah,
so they're actually following the Art of War letter by letter, page by page.
That's why I left it up in the air, because I'm not a military expert. That's the least of my thing.
Yeah, I had a comment to that as well, because people this has been mentioned. It's mentioned all the time in the media and stuff, like, oh, they need a 3-1 advantage, or like so like the biggest war in all of history completely bucked that trend entirely, which tells me that like maybe like that's a recommendation, like in terms of like numbers, it would be nice to have a 3-1 advantage if you're attacking, but the Germans in Operation Barbarossa, like, I mean, just wiped out the Russian army, and like they basically made it to the gates of Moscow with something like 200,000 casualties on the German side and something closer to like 3 or 4 million casualties on the Russian side.
Yeah,
and
but
they had a smaller army from the beginning,
But when you use surprise, of course, you can beat this disadvantage when you have surprise. I think this is one factor. If you have less troops and you want to attack, you need surprise. Otherwise, it's going to be a death trap.
Or defeat in detail.
But how long does it take? How long does it take to drive from Poland to Moscow, though? I mean, like they couldn't have been surprised the whole time, like and basically the whole time the Russian side outnumbered them. So I mean, I think there's like another factor there, and it's just like the German army was superior in every way over the Soviet army, like better training, better equipment, better tactics, better generals, just like all around better. And like I think that's definitely a bigger factor than just like the numbers when it comes down to it.
I agree, but at the same time, last thing before we close, don't forget the purge. The Stalin purge, that it eliminated a lot of officers.
I just wanted to say that as well.
Yeah.
The problem was the Soviet cannot defend because all the best officer has been purged, and no one is happy to defend and fight.
And there's this story, and this explains also the Soviet mentality. I did a veterans book where people from their family told me war stories from their family going from a long time back. And one of them said the story of a Russian unit. And they said, so his father was in not the KGB, but the NKVD all right, to the secret police, but they were tasked to hold the front line and to make sure, like police, to make sure that nobody would retreat without orders. So one day they said that there was one group of Soviets that was captured by the Germans, and then the Russians managed to recapture these guys. And the problem is that one of these prisoners actually spoke to the Germans about their positions. He didn't hold any information. So once these Soviet guys got back into friendly lines, the NKVD guys were like, okay, who's the guy that openly talked to the Germans about the information of our lines? Nobody talked. So he said, okay, so they shot them all. The entire group of guys are like, okay, at least we know that the guy who spoke is gone. But that's the Soviet mentality at the time. They don't care. They did the same with the purge. They're like, okay, well, some of these officers are planning something. Well, just going to get rid of them all. But it's tragic, but that's their mentality.
Yeah, that's a very famous part of the book about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago. I don't know if you guys have read it or not, but he said that the Russian motherland betrayed her soldiers 3 times, and the first time was, allowing them to get overwhelmed at the front, not allowing them to counterattack. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but there was like a long period where Stalin refused to acknowledge the fact that they were actually being invaded. And I actually don't remember the second time, but the second time was not allowing them to retreat. So there was many different circumstances where the German army would take 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 prisoners at one time. And then, so those Soviet guys would be shipped back to Germany and Poland, where they would be prisoners of war for the rest of the war. And the third time was when they liberated those prisoner of war camps. Those former Soviet soldiers were not free. They were then sent to Russian prisons because they were traitors for surrendering. So you couldn't be taken as a prisoner of war as a Russian and actually come out on top. Was the gist of that?
Yeah.
Okay, I need to do a quick correction to my statement earlier about the interview. So it was 2 companies where only him and his captain were survivors, okay. And it was an Mi-24 helicopter, and that it wasn't the call for reinforcements what actually happened, but they walked into an existing battle while trying to beat the reinforcements. And then they ended up fighting in that, where everyone except for those 2 died.
Let me put the last question before closing, because we are already 2:27 minutes, and in Singapore it's 4:30 a.m. Poor Wyatt, but I need to bring you
he doesn't sleep.
A lot of presents. So I will bring you some good food from Italy for you. So I collected only the last 2 questions. If we can make a fast round about it. One that is more geopolitical, because we are not talking about it never, so it's interesting. What do you think about the role of India is playing in this crisis? And one more technical, maybe for all the mappers. That is, will there be a Transnistria front soon? Or if Russia will use the peacekeeper that is located there for the war?
Totally very different questions.
Okay, I have a quick answer because I've answered this question many times on my channel, and that is, there will not be a Transnistria front. The only time in which troops from Transnistria will be used is if Russia actually connects a land bridge through Kherson to Moldova. So unless they connect through land, they will not use it. There's only between 2,500 and 10,000 soldiers in Transnistria, and it will be completely cut off from any supplies other than airborne, and they will just be shut down and so on. So it's suicide to use them unless there is a land bridge.
Okay. Any other opinion or some opinion about? Yeah.
I can go. Just quick answers for both of them. India, like many other countries in the world, is going to do whatever is best for India. It doesn't seem like they even care to take sides, and I would suggest that's even like similar to like what Saudi Arabia is doing. Even though there's so many accusations that Saudi Arabia is taking the Russian side, it seems like they're, both of these countries and many other countries are just going to do what's best for them. So that I see them to continue doing what's best for themselves. They're not going to pick a side for one. Like there's a lot of Indian labor that's used by American companies in terms of like telemarketing and like various different. Actually, the company I work for actually has employees in India, so there's economic connections there. So they don't want to piss off America, but at the same time, most of India's military equipment is actually of post-Soviet Russian build. They have a production license for T-90s actually. So they're not going to piss off Russia either. They're just going to keep toeing the line, doing India. I agree with Weeb Union on Transnistria. I would say that if I can see them opening up the front before the bridge is established, only to like capture the last couple miles or something. Like say if they have if there's a Russian force pushing that way from Mykolaiv direction, and they see a tactical battlefield advantage of bringing in 2 extra brigades from Transnistria, or I mean, really like there's potential that there could be more than that coming from Transnistria, because there's like what, like at least there's like 1 or 2 full strength Russian battalions coming from there, and then Transnistria itself has its own reserves that it could raise up, and it has a couple thousand active duty troops. So I mean, I guess like you're looking at like total like maybe 7,000 or 8,000 troops, like if they had time to mobilize, perhaps more than that, but like that seems like a maximum amount to me. So yeah, I mean that group might get activated if Russian lines get close enough there, and there's a clear path to victory. Like, but other than that, they're not going to risk that territory getting attacked. That's all I have to say about that.
I will address the easy one first, the Transnistria. The number of Russian troops in Transnistria is negligible, is laughable in fact. So the any talk about starting a new front there is not going to be the Russians. It's going to be the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians has been enticing Moldova and say, no, do you want us to help you take back Transnistria? Like they asked Moldova at least 3 times. So Moldova is like, no need your help, that kind of situation. So yeah, so don't worry about Transnistria. Transnistria is a pointless place. Like I used to say, is a badly drawn banana. Is nobody wants it, and yeah, it looks like a banana. It's just very badly drawn. So then, in terms of India, also India is the more interesting one. There's no so people in Asia ask me, we don't really give a damn about Ukraine, like really, we don't care. It's like it's a kind of like a faraway place, backwaters where nothing grows, although a lot of things grows there, but we don't care. It's the kind of situation, because we have more closer hotspots we need to care about there, where we don't even care enough about. For example, Indonesia, they have some problem with their I think, where's that place, Guinea, the Guinea island. They have their own rebels they need to deal with. In Myanmar, that is just next to India. That is the bigger problem India actually is facing, because they have an active war zone, a very low intensity one, but still a mess just next to them. And then they have their own rebels that they need to deal with in Nagaland, which is just next to Myanmar. And then you have Pakistan, which is a nuclear power that is in turmoil, and Imran Khan is putting an ultimatum. He's going to overthrow the government. So, and I have no time to cover it. So this is he's daring. He's getting his supporters to march on the capital. So that's happening in Pakistan, and it's also next to India. So and then India's most powerful, most advanced weapons all come from Russia. But yet at the same time, you can see that United States did not dare to sanction India, because India is too big, too powerful, too important to make an enemy out of, because the entire Indian Ocean is technically India's backyard. No one claims Indian Ocean except India. There's no one can control the Indian Ocean. India only controls the Indian Ocean, which is why they are extremely obsessed with the Chinese port in Sri Lanka, because that is an infringement into their backyard. So India is the kind of is a major power. They are not exactly below China. So they are perfectly fine. The United States, they're not there to touch them, because you lose India, you lose Asia. So so you don't have to worry about India in that sense. So yeah, so India is not going to make a difference to this war. If Asia don't really care about Myanmar, you can be sure we don't care about Ukraine, for sure. Ukraine is nothing to us.
Thank you, DPA, Dem History, and Alex, and we close.
Sure. First of all, I like these two joint questions, because the other questions that you've always chosen two questions at the same time, but it was always easy to like fall from one question to another, like flow with it. This one is just Transnistria straight to India. So it's like I have to close one side of my brain in order to get to a completely different topic that I don't know how to flow to it. But
it was a trick for ending the stream.
It was a brain teaser, but with Transnistria, there's not really much else to say except for the fact that you're using a lot of airspace when it comes to Transnistria. I think what we saw with the missiles that was going off across all of Ukraine, especially with Lviv, you were starting to see a lot of those missiles with the excuse of going through the zone of Transnistria to hit Western Ukraine, Northwest Ukraine. You were starting to see them starting to go through the axis of Moldova. And that's what I think what's the benefit of having Transnistria on the side of the Russians, is that they can get away with getting into the there's sliding some missiles that are able to hit direct to fly over their air zone, because they have that space, Transnistria, that belongs to the Russians. That's all I have to say on part of that they're able to slide it in. With India is very interesting. I've been focusing more on India than I have with China. When it comes to India, or especially this year at least, India is now becoming, like I think DPA said, they don't care about Ukraine, but India is like the epitome of diplomacy right now. They have not chosen a side. They're not a wild card like the way Turkey is or Belarus is. They're not fully involved with the West, but they're not fully involved with Russia. They're not, but they know how to align themselves very well. So it's very unique to see that India is now stepping up to become another world power, and that is really showing that this is a multipolar world, including the Russians, the Chinese, now India, and of course the United States. You're starting to see India that's still doing weapons and business aside with the Russians, that because they've already are very well used to Soviet era equipment, military. So I remember, I think it was back in 2018 or 2019 when the president of India, is it the prime minister or president? What do you call him? PM? Prime minister?
I think it's prime minister.
Sure.
Prime Minister Modi.
Modi. When he was in Washington, I remember in 2018, 2019, Trump tried to make it exclusive that you only buy weapons from us and not from the not from the Russians. And where Modi said no, he rejected that offer and he closed the deal, which really surprised the Americans, saying, and it made sense because from the Indians' perspective, their army is they would have to learn from the very beginning again if they wanted to learn everything through the United States, yet they didn't want to become fully dependent on the United States alone. But this is what I find really interesting. When it comes to China, for example, they're not in their culture, their population is not happy with China, but yet if there was ever a real conflict, which happens in the mountain region, my money's on India that they gain the region. They have what it takes to land true ground units over there when it comes to the high Himalayas and everything. It's a very low oxygen, very vast climate, very freezing temperatures. That's something that Western ground units would never be able to do. And then they have the issue with Sri Lanka, which now is belonging to China, that they have their own port and everything. And you're seeing that China is slowly, once in a while, sending intelligence. They look like giant cruisers. There's like spy vessels that come in to look at what is happening with India and to spy on their networks. And that seems to be a big situation when it comes to their naval dominance. The last subject that I want to touch on with India is what is happening is now that they're starting to sell their own arms and their own missiles and their own shells to Armenia, which is something we haven't seen. Is it because they have a situation, an issue with Azerbaijan? That's not the case. What they do have an issue with is with Turkey, and they're also showing Iran as well as Pakistan, that they're showing that we are going to start to have influence in this area, in this region at some point, and that we want you to notice that we're also here some way. So I'm very curious to see how that builds out and why Armenia accepted a weapons to arms deal with India, which is a brand new topic I'm building on and seeing where I can go from there. But India is something that you should not just joke around with anymore. They are a significant diplomatic power that is very independent. I'll rest my case there.
Thank you, Dem History. Alex, if you want to close, you have a closing speech.
No, but when you're last of such brilliant minds, I don't know what else I can add. You guys covered the entire field. But yeah, the closing words for the Moldova, there's not going to be an offensive there anytime soon, because already when the front line is well supplied, it's hard to maintain it. So imagine if you can't even supply it. It's just going to be a disaster. And for India, well, India is playing, I think India is more on the pro-Russian side, just because of the currently in the world, just by being neutral, you're with the enemy. That's how a lot of people see it. And so I think that's how the West sees it. Just by being neutral, you're with the enemy. You cannot be neutral. And they showed this is their point of view. So India is like, nah, it's not our war. We're going to do business with both, but it pisses off a lot of people. Now, I think that India is still, can we ignore India? I don't know if they're ready to be a world power yet. I think that there's a lot that they still have to do to be a true world power, especially in the military domain, because we see that if you want to be a world power, you need a navy, you need to be able to strike in a lot of places, and India is not there currently. So I don't see, for now, anything coming from there.
Perfect. So, thank you all for your time.
Can I have one last
Alex,
comment, quick?
For sure.
Just because I want to give ourselves a pat on the back, and we're actually saying something true, because just 2 hours ago, Viktor Orban from Hungary, the Hungarian president or whatever you call him, he says, had a meeting today with representatives of German companies active in Hungary. I assured them they can count on our support. We may have disagreements from time to time, but not as many as they have with their own government back home. So as we can see, Germany's outsourcing to Hungary. They're having a lot of fun. Hungarians are having a lot of fun because they're playing both sides in this conflict, buying a lot of oil and gas from Russia despite the sanctions, and getting permission to do so. So a lot of European countries are setting all their industry to Hungary because there they get the cheapest by far.
And we're not in Eurozone, so it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So thank you all for your attention. Thank you to the public that stayed over 2 hours and a half. Thank you to Ian, Wyatt, Eric, and thanks, Alex. Dem History, that is our new guest, Web Union. I hope that for the next one also military summary and the war in Ukraine will return. And have a good night to everybody, and see you soon. We will have a lot of updates for all the guests. You have their link in the description of the video, so please subscribe to everybody, and stay tuned. That we will have a lot of news in the next weeks. Good night to everybody.
It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you for letting me come along.